Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Sherman Mound, which is a very large Indian mound near Osceola. See if I can get it to work. Okay, so Osceola is up in northeast Arkansas. It's right on the Mississippi River, and that's where they just built the Big River Steel Mill just south of town. And this Indian mound, you can basically see the new steel mill right from the mound, and the highway goes right by it. So here's a picture of the mound taken last fall. You can see it's like bigger on one end than it is on the other, and currently all the land around it is an agricultural field, but there's, with the steel mill going in there, and there's a new electrical substation and an electrical power plant, this part of Arkansas is rapidly going from being agricultural to being industrial, all right? So I've been keeping my eye on this mound and kind of taking care of it to make sure it doesn't get damaged for a number of years, all right? So this is a geomorphic map, and it shows you the setting of the mound, and what this is this is where the Mississippi River has meandered back and forth over the years, and these are relic swales, and oops, I forgot, if you touch the screen, it moves, all right? And if a fly gets on there, it moves too. But anyway, the setting of it, it's a classic setting for a Mississippian site. It's a Mississippi Delta. It's the Arkansas Delta, you know, it's a very agriculturally productive area. These Indians, they were dependent on corn and stuff, so they lived in an area where the soil is very good for growing things. So the Sherman Mound first began to be investigated in the late 19th century. And this is a wood-cut drawing that was actually published in the Chicago paper. And then later on, it was in one of the most famous archaeology books of all time. It's the Cyrus Thomas's book called Mound Explorations. And in that book, that was sponsored by the Smithsonian. And that, at that time, a lot of people thought that the mounds were not really built by Indians. And there was this myth, sort of this racist myth, that the mounds were built by this mythical group of people called the mound builders. And so Cyrus Thomas kind of destroys that myth in his book. And the Sherman Mound is important for being in this book. And this book is kind of like the Old Testament of archaeology in Arkansas. So then in the early 20th century, there was a Dr. Hampson. He lived at Nodina Plantation, which is another very famous archaeological site. And there's a museum now in Wilson, Arkansas called the Hampton Archaeological State Park Museum. It's a little bitty building right now, but they're building a new one and it's about to open. And I recommend anytime you go up there, if you want to go, you ladies were talking about going to visit the mound, well, go by Wilson and you can see the museum and you can eat at the cafe. And Wilson's a nice little town. It has, you know, like this English Tudor fronts on everything, right? It's a very interesting little place. But it's being restored because the Lawrence brothers had bought all the farms there and they were really doing a lot. But anyway, Dr. Hampson was an archaeologist. He was like an amateur archaeologist, and he excavated all around. He did a little bit of work at the Sherman Mound, but he worked at his plantation in Nodina. He also dug across the river at Richardson Landing in Tennessee. But he collected a large number of artifacts. And his son was killed in World War II, and after the war, he had a museum out in a barn dedicated to his son that showed all these artifacts. And then in the 60s, the state acquired Dr. Hampton's collection and built a museum for him, and it's a nice, I always heard that the barn was kind of a sad looking museum, but the state acquired it, and so all those collections and everything are there. But so the Sherman Mound was only one of many sites that, that Dr. Hampson investigated. So theoretically, this is like a little idol that was found at the Sherman Mound, and no one knows where it is now. The only thing that's left from it is there's this photograph that was in Dr. Hampton's notes. I've gone through all of his notes and looked at it, but it's just a little small. You can see the person's fingernail, so it only was about this tall. Then in 1967, the state created the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, and they're like the professional group that maintains all the information about archaeology in Arkansas. And they have a nice, they were affiliated with the museum for a while, which is in the collection you are up here. Anyway, so in 1967, the survey gets created, and they began going out and looking at sites all over the state, and they create a repository of information about all the sites. Well, they visited the Sherman Mound. So actually, these guys, LMS, this was a project that was done in the 40s, all right? Those are pictures from the 40s of the mound. I think this is interesting. This is a guy is plowing the field with a mule there, right? And so in the 40s, the Lower Mississippi Survey, really, and these guys were from Harvard Museum, the Peabody Museum at Harvard, all right? And so they took collections from the mound, and they took photographs, and they studied all sites all up and down the Mississippi Valley. There's literally hundreds of them, and they produced a report in 1951 that's kind of like the New Testament of archaeology in Arkansas. Okay, it's the and you know, for some reason, some of these didn't show up. Sorry about that, y'all. I saw the X when we tested this earlier. But then in the 60s, the Arkansas Archaeological Survey people start going back up there too, and they're visiting the site, okay? But nobody is really excavating at the Sherman Mound. They're just kind of like visiting it, taking surface collections. Then in the 80s, Dan Morse, who was a great archaeologist that was up at ASU for many, many years, he went there and he visited the site. And you can see it still has this three-layered look to the mound, and then this square out here is showing you where the village area was that was out from the mound, because there was those are occupation areas where there was houses and features and burials, and it's where the Indians lived that created the mound. You know, I don't.
What did you build it in?
It's PowerPoint.
And were they JPEGs?
Yeah.
We try to reload it.
I've got it on another one too. I've got it on another one.
You keep talking to them and I'll work on this.
Okay. Well, so the Sherman Mound. So then I got interested in the Sherman Mound about 2006 when they first started talking about putting a steel mill up at Osceola. So we did a survey. It was called Project Blue Water, and it was all secret and everything because they didn't want the people in Baton Rouge who also, it was the ThyssenKrupp steel mill. And there was 3 places in the United States where they were looking at building. One was in Baton Rouge, one was somewhere in Mississippi, and then there was the what we call Project Blue Water, which was a 3,000-acre tract south of Osceola. And so we went out and we did what we call a phase 1 cultural resources survey. That's where you just go out and you identify all the archaeological sites that are within a piece of property, okay? So within that 3,000 acres, we found about 100 sites, right? And some of them were Native American sites, and some of them were like places where there had been old tenant houses and things, right? So yeah, that's what it was doing. It was
maybe the machine, may not be you. I'm going to get my laptop and try it there. You go back to the first one?
sure.
Because we really need to see these images, don't we?
Uh-huh.
Okay. We'll close that one down.
Sorry
guys, technical
I did this same presentation at Stacy's office and it worked fine.
Sure.
It was in a computer though.
It's really not liking these. This one's in a computer too, actually. It's just.
Well, so 2006, we go up there and we do the resources survey and we identify all these sites. Well then, and they were trying to get this tract basically shovel ready to build this steel mill, right? Well then ThyssenKrupp selects another location, so the project kind of just died, all right? But that's when I first started getting interested in the Sherman Mound, right? Then several years later, they started to get some interest in doing another mill that is now the Big River Steel Mill, right? And so what we did then is we went out to
Still same problem. All right,
so then we went out and we went to the sites that we thought were significant out at the steel mill tract, and we tested them. In other words, we did excavations at them, and we found a small village about a mile to the east of Sherman Mound where the deposits were this. There's a beautiful picture of it. There's deposits were about this thick, and it's just a layer cake of houses and stuff. And that village had been burned, all right? And so it was located within the steel mill property. So I consulted with the Quapaw Indians who are very interested in the Sherman Mound and all the archaeology of this area because, you know, they're the tribe from, you know, the lower Arkansas River, and they consider their ancestors to have come from northeast Arkansas, right? So we consulted with the tribe and everything, and they decided what they would do is they would just fence off this village within the steel mill and protect it ad infinitum, you know, for forever. So now if you go to the steel mill, right next to one of the big rolling mills, there's this little fenced off area, and it's about an acre in size, man. And it's the village in there, and they're never gonna touch it or anything. So that was our first preservation success, okay, was the protection of that village. And that site was called 3 MS 780. And all sites, you saw that the Sherman Mound is, yeah, so here's 3 MS 780. Sherman Mound is 3 MS 16, and those are called trinomials. It's a way of numbering all sites, archaeological sites, and 3 means Arkansas because the sites were alphabetized when there were only 48 states. Alabama's number 1, and Arkansas is number 3, and like Tennessee's 40, okay? But they, and then the second, the letters in there, that stands for the county. So this is Mississippi County, so it's MS, okay? Sites in Pulaski County are PU, all right? So we've recorded a number of sites out in here in town that are, that's another thing we can talk about if we can get this to work, right Daniel? But then, and then the last number is just an arbitrary number, and then there's information is on file up at Fayetteville at the Arkansas Archaeological Survey using those numbers. Okay, it's a way of like filing it and recording information about the archaeological sites, because the difference between archaeologists and looters is we like actually record the information and save it, okay? Whereas the looter just goes out there and digs and finds an artifact and just kind of puts it on a shelf, you know, just for, there's only seeing the art value of things, all right? So, so then the steel mill goes in and we test all the sites, and then they decide that the footprint of the mill, they reduced it from 3,000 acres to 1,500 acres, all right? And I got the mound excluded out of it. So the mound was not going to be affected. And the other village, you know, we protected it with the fence, right? And then all of the other sites that were located in there, we did excavations and determined that they weren't significant. So then they start constructing the steel mill, and they decide they want to put a railroad siding. There's a railroad, see the Sherman Mound, there's a highway goes across the north side of it, and there's a railroad that cuts right across the west side of it, right? So they decide they want to put in another rail line, a siding, you know, for the steel mill, right? So that's when we went back again and we started doing geophysical work at the mound. And that's geophysical is like ground penetrating radar and gradiometer. There's all electronic things. It's like new archaeology, modern stuff, you know, computers. And so I did we did gradiometer and we did ground penetrating radar at the location where the railroad siding was going to be. And we found some railroad artifacts, and then we started and we dug down a little bit, and right as we started to get to the undisturbed prehistoric level, I made them like stop, okay? So we protected that site, right? We didn't disturb any deposits, and we got the railroad siding built and everything. And that was 2014. Okay, then in 2016, the railroad decided that they wanted to put up a positive train control tower there. Okay, and that's called PTC. Okay, does anybody know what positive train control? That's the system that was mandated by, there was a Transportation Act in 2008. And so I think there's 160,000 miles of Class A railroad in the United States. And it's a safety system where they have these radio towers basically every 2 miles, and it switches, all right? And they have, in the radio tower is connected to the tracks and everything, and they can tell where the trains are and what they're doing, and they can turn a train off if it goes out of control or whatever. So the Sherman Mound, there's a switch there now because of this siding. So they needed to build a positive train control tower at the Sherman Mound location. So at this point in time, the railroad, Burlington Northern, they hired another company from out of state, all right? And they were supposed to monitor the construction of this positive train control tower, right? And kind of like the same thing we did when they built the siding, okay? Well, the monitor really didn't know what he was doing, and he let them dig a trench across the side of the mound, okay? So, and it uncovered a burial, and it uncovered some other features, and it was a big stink, okay? So then he reported it, and then the tribe was upset, and the SHPO's office, SHPO is Stacy Hurst, that's the State Historic Preservation Officer. They're the people that are like legally responsible for you know, dealing with Section 106 matters, which is basically what my business is. Contract archaeology helps people comply with Section 106 of the National Preservation Act, and that's how we do about probably 90% of all the archaeology in the United States now is done via these preservation laws and not through universities like the traditional, like Sam Dellinger was with the museum, and that was the old way of doing it. But now universities really don't do but probably 10% of the archaeology that's being done. So this is all funded, you know, via these preservation laws. So
We're almost there.
oh yeah.
Okay, so the space bar will advance.
Okay.
Is this a good place to start?
This is a good place to start, man.
Okay.
Yeah, any place is good to start. Now that we have some eye candy to look at, man. Way to go! I never would have gotten that going again, man. So this is a 1949 air photo that I actually got from the National Archives, okay? So it shows the Sherman Mound area, and if we zoom in on it, I'm not going to touch it, but this is the mound right here, all right? And then this is the village around the mound, and then these little black dots over here are tenant houses, and that's the railroad coming like this. And then this is the highway that comes like this, and that highway goes out to the landing and out on the Mississippi River, which is about 3 miles away. So what's nice about this is it shows you that where there were these houses, because when you go out and pick up artifacts, you'll get there'll be historic artifacts mixed with the Native American artifacts there. So then, in 1970, Phillips published this very famous book about where he defined all of the phases. Those are like it's the archaeological sequence for the lower Mississippi Valley, all right? And the Sherman Mound got placed in the Nodina phase. See, here's Sherman right here, and Nodina is nearby. That was the plantation where Dr. Hampson had it. And Nodina is a very famous phase, and you can actually, some of the artifacts from Nodina are upstairs in the curiosity cabinet show, as well as some Caddo stuff too. It's a nice exhibit. I just went and looked at it. So Sherman kind of gets collapsed in with this Nodina phase. This is a late Mississippian phase. It's equivalent to, well, Toltec is a little bit earlier than this, okay? Okay, now, so we were talking, kind of went through this already. These are in the 60s. People are going out to the Sherman Mound and they're like just making surface collections and they're not really digging anything. And we get a series of these. Everybody seems to conceive of the mound as that 3-tier design, just like that old woodcut. It's sort of a mental template, but it doesn't really look like that. Okay, so but that people continue to kind of replicate that in the drawings, right? Because these are just sketches. They're not done with any type of equipment. So then, about 2000, Plum Point Energy builds this giant coal, energy plant right across, right there at Plum Point, which on the old plantation there, Sans Souci, right? And when they do that, they put these power lines over the site. So this is actually one of the best modern maps of the site until recently. So the mound is here. And then these are concentrations of artifacts out there that are out in the village, right? And then the reason they did this is because they're going to put these power lines over the mound, these big high voltage lines, right? And they were trying to figure out where not to put the towers so that the footings of the towers wouldn't affect any, burials or deposits. So now this is the way that it looks now. So you've got these big towers. It's a double line, right? And that's the coal-fired plant there. It's basically over by the levee, and then the steel mill is over this way, right? So here's the track. That's the original track. That railroad was built in 1899, and they actually cut over one corner of the mound, and then there's the mound right there. So I had another picture where I showed you what it looked like before the power lines were there. I don't know if we skipped it or not. So then I told you that in 2006, that's when I started to get interested in the mound. And we found dozens and dozens. Each of those dots out there and those numbers is an archaeological site. And that blue area is the 3,000 acres that we were surveying for the Project Blue Water, right? And so that was and the Sherman Mound is over here on the edge of the property, you see? Most of those are actually places where there was tenant houses, but a few of them are good Mississippian sites. MS 780, I'm going to talk about it in a minute. It's right there. And then this is another really good Mississippian village down here. This is a picture of the Sherman Mound from when we were out there in 2006. It still had a tree on it then. That tree is gone now, but you can see how much different it looks before they put up those high voltage lines. And really, they probably never should have let them put those high voltage lines over the mound like that, because it's an adverse visual effect. But when they did it, they didn't address that, and it sort of got slipped through the cracks. But right now, when you're on the mound, you're directly under those things. You can hear them, and there's but anyway, I thought I like that because it shows how it looked for most of the time that I remember going up there. It's just cotton fields and a mound and nothing else. And now you go up there and there's a steel mill and there's lots of traffic on this highway, and it's crazy. And there's probably going to be a gas station across the tracks from there pretty soon too. So I told you they reduced the footprint. They took it down. They said, okay, we don't need 3,000 acres. We can build this steel mill in 1,500 acres. So they got the, these are their rail lines here, right? And this is like this is the layout of the steel mill. And it's these gigantic buildings, right? So that's the little site that we protected and put the fence around. And see, it's right by their railroad, and it's right underneath their power lines. And then that's the hot mill and the coal mill. But it's right in the middle of their facility. And so I actually have a little steel mill badge. And every once in a while I tell them, I need to go check on the site. And I drive out there and go out there and look at it and stuff. But the steel mill is pretty interesting. It's two gigantic blue buildings, and they do the coiled steel, right? And they say that there's another steel mill up at Armorel, that's the Nucor steel mill, and they did not want this mill built because of the competition, right? And so there was a threat for a lawsuit, and there was a lot of wrangling going on with this. We finally got it. The people at Nucor said, oh, if we build this mill here, the Mississippi River is going to dry up. You're going to kill all the eagles in Anderson Tully. And just any excuse. Oh, and they attacked me. They said I was the worst archaeologist of all time, and I didn't know what I was doing and stuff. But what the good thing is we got the mound excluded. So this became their property. So the mound got excluded, and that site got protected. And that's what we really want to do, is protect these things, because there's burials at these things, and they're considered sacred properties by the Quapaw Indians, right? So then they built a new electrical substation right here to provide the mills use. That's how they melt the steel, is they use massive amounts of electricity. So then the little village that I was telling you about, this is the archaeological deposit. Now to an archaeologist, this is like super sexy, because see, it's like these are the layers, right? That's all cultural layers. That's a hearth, that white area. Then the orange areas, that's daub, that's the remains of their buildings. So there was a series of buildings are stacked up on top of each other, and that's really about this deep. And so they occupied, it's a small village that was a satellite too. It was occupied at the same time as the Sherman Mound, but it was a satellite village, and it's about a kilometer or a mile away from the main village. And that's the evidence of the deposits that are there, and we've got that protected forever now. So that was one of our second preservation successes here. I did a gradiometer survey of the little village, and that unit right there that I just showed you is right there, and this is the actual gradiometer image, and then this is our interpretations. And so the red areas are where we think that there was Mississippian houses, right? And what a gradiometer is it's kind of like a fancy three-dimensional metal detector, all right? It's just a really elaborate metal detector. It uses 4 sensors, and it detects variances in the Earth's magnetic field. And when you get images like that, what it means is there's a lot of metal in the ground because there was a house here, and so that's that's sort of a distortion. But these over here, where you have the black next to the gray, those are the probable houses. And we know from that one unit that we ground truth that we tested it, so we do know that this is a reasonable interpretation, that there was about 16 houses at this small village. So then we didn't do anything at the Sherman Mound for a while. And then I told you they were going to build this new railroad siding, right? So this is my friend Chet Walker, and what he's doing is that is the ground penetrating radar. You just drag it across the ground, and what we're doing is we're trying to see if there's anything under this gravel or the ballast for the railroad. And this is the image we produced. And really, it didn't really work very good here because there's so much disturbance here, but we tried it, and see, this is the edge of the mound right here. So it's so close to the mound that you can be pretty sure that there's something underneath there, all right? So when they actually started to build the railroad siding, we stripped it like this, and you see how close we are to the mound. So we stripped it off, and I carefully monitored it, all right, and made sure that whatever they were stripping off was only like historic period deposits associated with the railroad, okay? And if we started to find anything that looked like an intact or Native American deposit or feature in the ground, then I made them stop, so they could only go so deep to where we didn't disturb anything, right? So they found one of those things. That's an old like big old wrench for like tightening the bolts on the individual tracks and stuff now, because the railroad sections used to be 30 feet long. Now they're like 1,000 yards long, you know, and uni-welded. But so anyway, so we found railroad artifacts, and then right here we started to get, that's a little pit that was made by a Native American, and this is charcoal and pieces of corn, you know, and things like that, and began to get artifacts. So it was clear that we were entering like the ground that had never been disturbed before. So I made them stop right there, and you can see it in the profile. See, there's the gravel. Then this first layer to about right there, all of that is just historic fill associated with the railroad. And then at the very, very bottom, we went into the prehistoric deposit about that much, and then we stopped. Okay, so we didn't disturb anything. And then this was an example of some of the artifacts that we found while we were there. The orange stuff is daub, that's the remains of their houses. B up there, that's a potsherd, a piece of a pot, okay? And it's shell-tempered pottery, and so it's Mississippian aged. And then we found a lot of charcoal, all right? And like good archaeologists, we tabulate everything, give you tables and stuff, but then that, the guy in the yellow vest is Everett Bandy. He is actual Quapaw Indian, and he monitored me. I was the monitor being monitored, okay? And so we, not only did we monitor the stripping, but we did some little digs out in front of the track hoe before it got down there to make sure that we weren't disturbing anything. So we really went to a lot of intensive effort to make sure that we didn't disturb anything. Then in 2016, the positive train control structure needs to get built, and so Burlington BNSF Railroad hires this out-of-state firm, and they really didn't know what they were doing, okay? And so they come out here, and yet after we spent all this careful time trying to avoid doing anything, well, what do? They put a trench right across there. So that's terrible, man. It's a travesty, man. You know, I mean, what are you thinking is going to happen? You're trenching right next to the mound. I mean, they should have just dug down like we did a little bit, and all that was for a cable to connect, you know, so it could have been like, you know, this deep, and you could have put gravel on top of it or something, but they messed it up, and everything hit the fan then, okay? Stacy got involved, and that's the SHPO, and then the tribe got involved, and then they called me up, and and I had been, Chairman Berry is like the chief of the Quapaw, and he and I had been talking about doing a geophysical project and some extra work at the Sherman Mound for a number of years. And when I found out this happened, they said, well, give us a proposal to do some work, because what's going to happen is they, oh yeah, this is, so this is in their trench. You know, can you see that little thing like there, that darker, see how it goes light and then it gets dark right there? That's a pit, all right? And then this is another pit. And so those are intact features. And one of those, it turns out, dated to 1290, which is Middle Mississippian, and it was like a trash pit. And the other one, we radiocarbon dated, and it turned out to be 1650, but it had human bone in it, so it was a burial from 1650, all right? So you got this problem. So they collected these samples, and then basically that company got fired, and then they hired me to analyze what they found in this trench, and then we gave them a proposal to do some additional work, which was going to be to mitigate the adverse effect of them disturbing that, right? So then I went up there, and I noticed too that they bulldozed out a section of the mound right here, right? Because see, this is the same place. When you're looking at this photo, I'm standing in virtually the same place when we took that picture. And when they took that silver shack out, see, they knocked out this part of the mound. See, that was there, should be right here, and it's not. So they whacked out part of the mound in addition to digging the trench in the mound. And Then it rained a lot, and you can see artifacts. You can see these are, this is potsherds right here, and artifacts are just coming out of the side of the mound now, all right? And it's a big mess, okay? So what do you do about that, right? It's the kind of an after the fact deal. Well, we got a memorandum of agreement. This is kind of a legal document between the Federal Communications Commissions. They were the lead agency on this project because it was a radio tower, because it was a train control tower. They're the lead agency on this. Then this Arkansas SHPO, the tribe, and the railway, and we all agreed that because we've done this and it's bad, we're going to do something positive to mitigate the effect. We use that word mitigate a lot. It's kind of a weird word, but it's sort of normal for me. So we decided that what we do is some real work at the site, because for years people had just gone out there and done these surface collections, like I showed you in the history of the site. Nobody's really ever done any much professional work other than some surface collections. So we said, well, let's figure out how big the site is, because we don't even know the size of it, the X and Y length of it. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it by doing a surface collections of where the artifacts are on the surface, and then we're also going to do some more geophysical, because we knew from doing the little village over the way, MS 780, that geophysical works pretty good here, because we found the other village. So we figured, well, we can figure out how big the Sherman Mound is using geophysical too. Then another thing we were going to do was all this dirt and soil samples and bones and everything that came out of the trench that they shouldn't have dug. They gave all that to me to professionally analyze and write up, right? And then we were supposed to refine the site chronology, right? Then, so we're also supposed to put up a fence on the edge of the railroads right away, so that they don't encroach onto the mound anymore. Their right of way is 50 feet on either side of the center line of the original track. So they do own part of the mound. The rest of the mound and all the property around it is owned by the Ohlendorf Trust, okay? So it's Miss Ohlendorf, and her grandson farms that property still to this day. So, and then finally, the third thing we were supposed to do was we were supposed to get the Sherman Mound nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. And so I wrote the nomination form last November, and we actually nominated it in the December. There's a state board meeting that nominates the properties to the National Register, and I gave a presentation at that, and then the property actually got formally listed back in February, right? And then Stacy Hurst liked my nomination presentation. You have to do a little short thing like I'm doing now, 5 minutes instead of an hour, you know. So. Anyway, she liked it, so she asked me to come give basically this presentation to a lunch and learn at their office. And then that's when Leah saw me do that, and she said, well, why don't you come here and do it for your brown bag here? So that's a lot of talking about nothing. But so we radiocarbon dating is where you take charcoal and they cook it in a cooker, and they figure out how long it was since it was burned, okay? And so we got the big pit feature. I had, the material that you pick is real important to pick an annual, okay? Because if you pick a piece of wood, the wood could be 100 years old, right? So it's best when you get a radiocarbon date to date something that's just an annual. So we have a persimmon seed, a maize or corn cupel, and a pecan shell. And see, those were all only there 1 year. So then I got 2 dates on feature 1, which was the bigger pit, all right? And they both came out, see, one is 1285 and the other is 1295. So they were very, very close together, very tight dating. So that tells me and other archaeologists that this pit, was formed, right around 1300, and that's the Middle Mississippian period, not the late Mississippian, because some people had thought, there was a debate about whether Sherman Mound was Middle Mississippian or late Mississippian. And this pretty much conclusively determines that it's late Mississippian. But the surprise was feature 2 got this much later date, 1650. Now that's, early historic period. That's Quapaw period and stuff. And what the thing is that the mound was probably occupied for, let's say, 50 years around 1300, right? And then it was abandoned. And then this other group comes here 300 something years later, and they're camping out at the mound and hanging out the mound, and they've actually buried people in the side of the mound, kind of like the way historic, people use the Indian mounds to put a cemetery on top of. So it shows that a Native American group came there and lived there later, okay? And I don't know which group it is, but Dr. Hampson also reported intrusive burials on the west side of the mound in 1945, and so what feature 2 is, it's probably an example of what he reported too. So that was kind of a surprise to find that. So faunal remains. This is how many bones came from each one, but the important thing is that there was human bones in feature 2. So and then we know that the date of it is 1650. So we've got a burial dating to that period, right? Then most of the bones in the samples that we've read are fish bones, right? So these people are eating a lot of fish, man, a lot of fish. But there was plenty of deer and bird bone too. Some of the deer were really large. One of the deer bones was so big, I thought it was an elk, man. The bone was so big, man. So then we go into our gradiometer survey. So we go out there when the crop is taken out of the field. This pictures are from, like, we did the gradiometer survey in November, December, and January. We went back several times and tried some different instruments, but this is the gradiometer. Okay, so these are called Barlington sensors, and they're like handmade in England, and there's 4 of them, and they're 50 centimeters apart. And so what Chet does is, and this is an aluminum trailer specially made by this guy that makes planes that gets the sensors away from the cart so that the cart doesn't, because the cart has metal in it, it'll mess it up. It has to be far enough back, okay? So then he drives back and forth like he's mowing the lawn all over the whole mound site, okay? And we did over 100 acres that way. He just drives all day long. And while he's driving, his GPS is tracking him, so we know exactly where every reading is taken, and we just call it mowing the lawn, all right? And you end up with these images. This is another gradiometer image, okay? You see the places where it's white, he didn't collect. And this is the railroad, and this is the highway, and that's a ditch, a drainage ditch, and then these are just other unsampled areas, okay? So all of this noise down here, that is where those tenant houses were that I showed you in the air photo. And anywhere there's always a historic house, there's always a lot of metal in the ground. People are dropping nails and this cans and this, that, and the other. So that's a bunch of noise, right? And then that's the tower for the electrical, the high voltage line. And then that was where another tenant house was too. But the key is, here's the mound. But this line going all the way around here, that is a palisade wall. You know, it is like a fort, like a wooden wall that completely enclosed the whole village. So this was a fortified town, right? And it covered 40 acres. Now this is a close-up of the northwest corner of the town. So here's the wall. You can see it really good. Now, what do you think these things are? Those are little bastions that stick out. That where it's like you ever look at a fortification, you know, it's where the bastions stick out. So an Indian would have been sitting here with, with an arrow, you know, and so that they could repel the other people. There's about 56 of those bastions. And you can see they're very regularly spaced, but it's just like we would make a fort, like Fort Laramie or something like that, you know, out west. These are wooden poles in the ground with these bastions taken out. And I figured, I did a calculation, needed something like 6,000 poles to build this fence, because the circumference of it was 1 mile all the way around it, and it enclosed 40 acres. So, and the Sherman Mound is right in the middle, right? Then we also identified the remains of 2 mounds that had been plowed down, okay? And these are east of the Sherman Mound in a part of the village where there was a lot of occupational debris, right? But this little feature here is a plowed down mound. It's probably 20 by 20 meters or 60 by 60 feet. And this one is about the same. That is a looter's pit. And Dr. Hampton talked about a guy looting that pit in 1945, or looting one of the mounds in 1945. And I believe that is the pit from the looter's pit. And there's 3 pots in the Hampton Museum that are from that pit. And there was some burials in there too. So that mound is kind of a special little mound, you know. So I use this as a free app called Memorandum of Map, and I can take the georeference file from the gradiometer, and I have it on the phone, and I can walk around out there and follow my blue dots. So if we want to go ground truth or dig any of these features, I can just follow it on my phone, and I can tell you, I've taken the Indians out there, and you can walk around, and you can say, well, we're standing on the bastion wall now. You walk a little bit further. You can be right at the spot, and you just do that without having to break out of transit or anything like that. Okay, we have a lot of toys to play with. All right, so I'm really into drones and stuff, and so sometimes we use the quadcopters, and then this particular time we're using, this is a handmade little plane, right? And it it's run by a computer on the ground, and you tell it where you want it to fly, and then you just throw it up in the air, and it flies back and forth all over the whole mound, right? And it's taking pictures the whole time. So I get, not only am I going to get a picture of the mound, but I mapped the mound, right? Like, you know, topographic map, you know. And then I also took infrared pictures and all kinds of different, I used all kinds of different cameras, okay, on this little drone, and we flew him around. See, RGB, that's regular photography, full spectrum, near infrared, and thermography, okay? So I was kind of like experimenting to see what we could get with these different cameras, okay? In addition to mapping the site and getting a really good digital mosaic image of the site exactly the way it looked the day we were there. So then these are some of the images that we produced. This wasn't just taken from Google Earth. This is, you can actually see the shadows from the towers here, but here's the mound. It's in round grass, and then the village is out here, you know. This is one of our contour maps. So the mound is right here, and then you can see kind of the edge of an old swale. This would have been a little low ground along a thing called Sandy Bayou, right? So it was, that was the edge of the village, was on the edge of this floodplain of this creek. Then because everything is all georeferenced, I can put all the maps together and layer them on top of each other. And so you can see, well, look, what I thought was that mound, ooh, that actually was a slight rise out there in the field. And where the other one was another slight rise. So the things begin to like correlate together. And so it supports the assumption that those are mounds out there. This is I love these. This is a digital elevation model. And so the bright color, the yellow and the orange areas are high, okay? And the medium elevation is kind of green, all right? And then the low areas are in blue. So this is, again, that swale. This is Sandy Bayou right here. Then this is a swale, low ground. Then this is the edge of the terrace, and the village, so you came around like that. So they were using this slightly higher ground to put their village on, right? And then I think that they got the dirt from the mound from this area up here, right? That's called their borrow pit, right? This is another type of image that we can create using all this data, but it's a slope model image. And so what that means is that where you see something that's black, it's very steep, okay? And where it's white, it's relatively level. So look at the shape. The interesting thing about this is the shape of the mound. See, this is very steep on three sides, and then it kind of goes like that. And so remember the original image, the one where it was the pen and ink drawing where it was three terraced, okay? See, it doesn't really look like that, does it, man? So what it is this is a classic Mississippian platform mound with a ramp or probably a stairway coming up on that side. And somehow that got, you know, sort of misinterpreted by that guy drawing it back in 1890, whatever, you know. But this is what it really looks like, and this is the way mounds look in Mississippian villages all over the place, right? And the orientation is to the summer solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunset, you know, so it's celestially aligned, right? The Indians were pretty smart. So with that data too, you can put it on your computer and you can really play with it. Okay, so this we've exaggerated the vertical scale, and we can showing it to you in 3 dimensions. So the mound is right here, and it sort of exploded up because I've exaggerated the scale. These lines, that's the railroad, and this is the railroad siding that's going over to the steel mill. But you can see that areas of habitation, see it's a little bit higher there, and then I can rotate this and spin it around and do all kinds of things with it. But with the model, I've got like a big cloud model of this site, so that I can do a lot of things with it. So then we interpreted the geophysical data as follows. So the red ring around the outside, those are, that's the wall, and then the little purple or blue, whatever color those are where I think there are houses, right? So most of the houses are east of the mound, and there's little clusters of neighborhoods, and I have a big technical report on this about the size of a phone book, and I can tell you like the average size of the house in each little neighborhood and such. So, and then that's putting the interpreted, those are where I think there are houses placed on the digital elevation model, okay? Most of them are east of the mound. And though this is sort of the overall conceptual view of what was there. So we have the main mound, Sherman Mound, then we have 2 mounds to the east, and then we have these habitation areas, and it's all enclosed within that wall that was a mile long, 40 acres inside there. So it was a fortified Middle Mississippian town. And we really had no idea that this was like that until this data got collected within the past year or so. So one of the things I did was with having this bit cloud model, you can see how accurately it mapped the railroads. You can see the individual ties and stuff. It's like, I also used a LiDAR. We set up LiDAR and we shot points with a LiDAR gun too out there. So it's super detailed. You can zoom in and out all you want. But I was able to figure out the volume of the mound. I just traced the base of the mound and then asked it, and so it told me what the volume of the mound is. And from that, and you make some other assumptions about how many baskets an Indian can carry per day and stuff like that. And I was able to talk about how long it took to build the mound. It depends on some different things, but it took anywhere from like 8 to 20 years to build it, but relatively not really that long, really, you think about it, man. And this is a very large mound. That was one of the other things I want to point out. This is a very big mound. It's probably the biggest mound in northeast Arkansas right now, and it compares on scale, it's probably like about number 20 in the whole United States in terms of volume, A very impressive thing. So then one of the last things we did was we went out there and we collected all the artifacts that we found on the surface, okay? And so we go out there and we just collect each one individually and record the location using a sub-meter GPS. So we can reconstruct where every single artifact, so every item has an individual point, XYZ, for where it is. So we just went out there and collected. And then I can put that information, the yellow dots are where we found artifacts, and I can put that on top of everything is georeferenced, so I can put those maps together and I can start correlating artifacts with different parts of the site and different penalties. And so most of the artifacts are near the mound or in the habitation areas, right? And another thing about this site is the artifact density on the surface is not very great. It's sort of low density, and I think that after they abandoned it, the floods from the Mississippi River deposited a lot of clay soil on top of it, and that also served to preserve those features in the ground, and that's why the Gradyometer data was so good, even though it's been plowed up, because we've done other sites that where we had terrible Gradyometer results because everything has been plowed, but that the flooding after they left basically mantled the site with some clay enough to where it protected it. So then these are the decorated, this is the distribution of the decorated pottery. Most of the pottery that we got from here was plain, and most of the artifacts, in fact, from the site are pottery, and the red ones are different decorated types. And these decorated, I don't want to bore you with it, but the decorated pottery is of Middle Mississippian types that goes with that 1290 date. So there you have, that's all my conclusions. It's a classic mound and plaza complex, all right? It was surrounded by this wall, and we know that it's Middle Mississippian now, and we have the dates to prove it, but we also know that it was reoccupied later. And there's a similar site nearby, all right? And there's a whole pattern of these villages going basically from Memphis up to like Sikeston, Missouri. During the Middle Mississippian, there's a whole string of these things. So the Middle Mississippian world, right, at that time, Cahokia was like the biggest town in the United States. You heard of Cahokia as a giant, there was probably, say, 20,000 people lived there, and it was a super extent, over 100 mounds there. So Cahokia is up there, and they have, even upstairs here, there's artifacts that are Cahokia related and Middle Mississippian. All that iconography stuff is Middle Mississippian. So I was doing a book chapter about Middle Mississippian in, for something else. But it turns out, it was like, wow, all of a sudden I've got a Middle Mississippian site and I'm doing this chapter about this. But say, this is the Middle Mississippian world. And these are other sites in northeast Arkansas that have produced items that are like Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, right? stuff like this, right? This is a forked eye motif jar that I found at Kositchi Ditch about 20 years ago. That's like, it's shaped like an eye, right? This is a row of, those are severed heads, okay? And if this is taken off of a pot. This is a chunky stone here, and that's another little kneeling statue, somewhat similar to the one I showed you in the beginning, in the photograph that we don't know where it is now, right? And some other Middle Mississippian art. The shell that's carved up there, that's called the Akron Cup. That site is located between Batesville and Newport. And then these different gorgets. This one is called the Birdman Gorget. Can you see it's a man with wings is the Birdman Gorget. That's from Old Town Ridge. And then these are the McDuffie Gorgets. They show this guy has a mace or a war club in his hand, and he's got a chunky stone in this hand, and his hand is not a hand, it's a claw, so he's sort of a mythical deity, right? And then these guys are dancing, and they have their war clubs. That's called a long-nosed god, Mascat, and that's from up there by Norfolk Dam, right? And there, it's an earring is what it is, man. And then the other gorget, the one that's kind of star-shaped, that's called a Finkelstein-style gorget. So that was also up there from near Norfolk Dam. But these items they're really rare, and so mapping the distribution of them is important. So then I wrote my report, and that we satisfied that. Then I had to go and prepare this National Register nomination to get the Sherman Mound listed, and so it's significant under criteria A for broad patterns and events because of its association with early archaeology, and then under D, almost all archaeological sites get nominated under D, information potential, because of all that stuff is still in the ground, so it has potential, it's potentially significant. And then we got the property listed in February. And right now we're working on doing a historic marker. Okay, I'm getting this is I think this is the last slide. Okay, but we're working on a historic marker with Big River Steel and somebody else. So we're going to put it. There's a turnout. We're not going to put it at the mound because the railroad doesn't want people pulling over right at the mound. They're afraid somebody's going to get run over. You know. So and the trains, well, they rip through there. So but anyway. I've found a place within the village where there's a turnout, all right, and I've got the farmer, the Olsteins, to allow me to put the sign there. So we're still negotiating what's going on this sign, but this is our mock-up, and there's going to be a QR code on there, and it's going to link it to, we're supposed to do a podcast, right? And so you can scan the QR code, but this is probably not exactly what's going to be like, but it's our working thing right now. We're getting a lot of input from both the Quapaw tribe and SHPO's office and Ann Early, the state archaeologist. So. And that's about it. That's Chairman Barry. We had a big native consultation, so these are all Quapaw Indians. That's Julie Morrow, the archaeologist from Jonesboro. These people are all Quapaw. And that's pretty much the end of the presentation, y'all.